Welcome to another episode of the Bible Expository. In this episode, we're going to be considering Mark chapter 1, verse 5. Just to give a little bit of context, I'll read verses 4 and 5. John did baptize in the wilderness and preached the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. And there went out unto him all the land of Judaea, and they of Jerusalem, and were all baptized of him in the river of Jordan, confessing their sins. Now, this is going to be part 1 of a multi-part series on verse 5. We're going to be looking at geographical considerations in this part. The land of Judea, Jerusalem, and the river of Jordan. And then in the next part, we'll be considering the Trinitarian baptism. So let's begin with the map that is before us. And so this area that we're looking at, we would think of in modern times as Israel, but it actually was called Palestine, and there are a few places in the Bible where it was called Palestine. Of course, we need to make a distinction between the Palestine of the 2020s and the Palestine of thousands of years ago. And so the Palestine of thousands of years ago, which is what we're going to be focusing on, is basically the nation state of Israel. And historically, during Jesus' day, this nation was divided into sort of 3 broad areas. And so we have Galilee in the north, so we see the north there, Samaria in the middle, and then Judea in the south. And typically, whenever someone's referring to Palestine, it would be referring to the Mediterranean on the west coast, and then up to the River Jordan as a boundary on the east. But sometimes using the term Palestine, they're actually referring to part of the Transjordan, which is the part, the land that's on the east side of the Jordan River. So now let's just look very briefly at each one of these areas. Of course, Galilee is where Jesus did much of his ministry. We see Nazareth right there in the south and the Sea of Galilee. The River Jordan starts up here at Mount Hermon. You see that just at the top there. Mount Hermon, and comes down through the Sea of Galilee. And we will be talking about that here in a few minutes. Samaria is in the middle of the country as the second region. And then Judea is what we're really going to be focusing on, right? Since that's what this verse is talking about, Judea. So, first thing that is helpful to consider is that Judea gets its name because much of the area that we see here was given to the tribe of Judah, which is why it's called Judean. And even the term Jew comes from people from the tribe of Judah, and so they're called Jews. And so that's where we get the term Jews from. And so initially, whenever Israel started, right, and so Saul was the first king, and then David was the second king, and then Solomon was the third king, it was a united country of 12 tribes. There was frequently conflict between those tribes, but nonetheless, they were united together by Israel as their father. You remember Jacob was renamed Israel, and the 12 tribes were his 12 sons, and the two sons of Joseph. So, when Solomon was king, because of his proclivities and his lust, he desired women and he committed adultery. And because of that, God said that he was going to judge him and actually split the country. And so there was going to be one tribe in the south, which the nation was going to be called Judaea. And then, so that would be the southern kingdom. And then the northern kingdom was going to be Israel. And of course, that would include the lands, the areas that we just discussed, which would be Galilee and Samaria. So let's read where this happened and where God issues this judgment of the splitting of Israel into two different parts. And so this is 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 14. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, You shall not go unto them, neither shall they come unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after the gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burn incense and sacrifice unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned away from the Lord God of Israel, which appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after the gods. But he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, Forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding in the days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. His son is Rehoboam. Howbeit I will not rend it away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake which I have chosen. And the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was the king's seed in Edom. He was of the king's seed in Edom. And so the story goes on. God stirs up adversaries for Solomon. Rehoboam takes the reign after Solomon dies. People ask Rehoboam to lower the tax burden, which was high upon the people. He refused, and the northern kingdom of Israel was sort of formed at that time. They split off from him, and the tribe of Judah remained loyal to him. So, as I mentioned earlier, the name Judaea comes from the tribe of Judah, and we recognize, as we're going to talk about here in a minute, that Jerusalem, which is an important city according to billions of people, was the capital of Judea. But it was more than just the capital. It also had the place that God had chosen for himself. The tribe of Judah, and so it's important to recognize that the tribe of Judah was chosen as the tribe that was going to produce the king and kings in general. David was of the tribe of Judah, and ultimately we recognize that Messiah, who is called the Son of David, became and is the Messiah King, the King of Israel, the kingdom which will never be shaken, right? And so there's not a coincidence that the ruling city, Jerusalem, is in this tribe of Judea, which is of the tribe of Judah. Okay, and so let's look at a prophecy with respect to this rulership that I have mentioned, Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 12. And so Israel is prophesying over his sons, and this is the part right before he dies, and this is the part where he's prophesying over his son Judah. So Genesis 49:8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise, thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies, thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion. And as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh shall come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. He shall be red with wine, his eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. And so let's look to the next map, and this kind of gives us a picture of what the divided kingdom looked like. And so we did have many pagan nations, and of course their attending philosophies surrounding the nations of Israel and Judah on every single side. But we see, actually, as far as land area is concerned, Judah and Israel are almost the same size, but we get the split. We see Jerusalem is actually just at the very northern border of Judah and just outside the southern border of Israel. And so now let's consider Jerusalem here for a minute. So Jerusalem is right here. It is on a mountain, and that mountain is 2,600 feet above sea level, and actually it's about 4,000 feet above the area where John the Baptist was baptizing at the southern part of the River Jordan. And so God always said that he was going to choose a place where his name was going to be honored. And so let's look at that right now. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 11 through 14. Then there shall be a place where the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which ye vow unto the Lord. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God, ye and your sons and your daughters, and your men servants and your maid servants, and the Levite that is within your gates, for as much as he hath not part nor inheritance with you. Take heed to thyself that thou offer not thy burnt offerings in every place that thou seest, but in the place which the Lord shall choose in one of thy tribes, that thou shalt offer thy burnt offerings, and there thou shalt do all that I command thee. And so it started as Israel was in the wilderness, that God had commanded the tribes and the craftsmen and the Levites and the priests to build the tabernacle. And so the tabernacle was, in a sense, a mobile temple. It had cloth as walls. It had sort of like pedestals to hold the cloth up. And God told them, according to his will, to move various places, and they had to basically pack everything up, and God gave them the labor as far as which tribe would do what with respect to moving the temple around. Eventually, God allowed the people, after Moses' death, God allowed the people to move into the promised land. And eventually, the place where God's name would be honored was called Shiloh, and the tabernacle rested there, so it wasn't really mobile anymore. God allowed the enemies of Israel, because of their idolatry, to overcome Shiloh and to take it. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but eventually God was going to build a temple. You recall it was David's idea to build the temple, a sort of a permanent place, not just a tent. David was looking out of his palace and saying, I'm in this fine palace and the Lord is in a tent. Right, and so it was David's idea. Of course, God was inspiring him to do it, to build a temple, a permanent dwelling place, right, where people would come and encounter the living God. And so ultimately, that place that God chose was the temple in Jerusalem. And so let's read the account of this in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 18 through 25. And Gad came that day to David and said to him, Go up, rear an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And David, according to the saying of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded. And Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming on towards him. And Araunah went out and bowed himself before the king on his face upon the ground. And Araunah said, Wherefore is my lord the king come to his servant? And David said, To buy the threshing floor of thee, to build an altar unto the Lord, that the plague may be stayed from the people. And Araunah said unto David, Let my lord the king take and offer up what seemeth good unto him. Behold, here be oxen for burnt sacrifice, and threshing instruments, and other instruments of the oxen for wood. All these things did Araunah, as a king, give unto the king. And Araunah said to the king, The Lord thy God accept thee. And the king said unto Araunah, Nay, but I will surely buy it of thee at a price, neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God of that which doth cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver, and David built an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel. And so we start with the place on Mount Moriah, which is where the threshing floor was. David bought it. He offered, where we have recorded his first sacrifice, and then eventually that became the place of the temple. And so 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem and Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And so we have a history of this place that the Lord has chosen, specifically the temple in Jerusalem, and it didn't move and change. And so we see Jerusalem as the Lord's chosen city, even to the point where we're told that the author of Hebrews says a new city, which God is the architect of, and that new city is the New Jerusalem. In Revelation, we're given an account of the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven onto the earth. And this Jerusalem is simply God's chosen city, right? And so doesn't it make an awful lot of sense that the tribe from which the King Messiah would come, the tribe of Judah, the tribe anointed with rulership, that tribe and the land that they were allotted would include the city that God had chosen for himself. And so we see Jerusalem within the borders of the land of Judaea. And so now that we have considered both, as this verse, Mark 1:5 reads, the land of Judea, right? And then also Jerusalem. And so the final consideration is the River Jordan. And so let's move on to the next area here. And so the River Jordan starts in the north. And so I'll bring the camera up here. Whoops. If I can. And this is Mount Hermon. And so Mount Hermon in the north, and where Mount Hermon is, of course, so Mount Hermon actually is about 20 miles long and consisting of 3 peaks. two of which are over 9,000 feet high. And so there's perpetual snow on Mount Hermon. But whenever some of the snow melts, of course, that creates water, drainage, as well as any other forms of precipitation. But then there's also 4 sort of rivers or streams that come together, and I'm probably going to mispronounce the names of these all at Mount Hermon, or in the general area, but the Barat, the Hasbani, the Ladon, and the Benias. And so all these come together, and they form, and so we see this little small dot right here is roughly the area where it's at. They form the River Jordan. And so the River Jordan flows down through the Sea of Galilee. So it's going north-south, it's flowing south, and ultimately it ends in the Dead Sea. And so if we consider, again, as I mentioned previously, that Mount Hermon has peaks that are higher than 9,000 feet, so we're starting up fairly high. As we move to the Sea of Galilee, it's actually below sea level. And so this entire area right here where the River Jordan flows is called the Rift Valley. And most, if not all of it, is actually below sea level. And so the Sea of Galilee is actually 685 feet below sea level. And so you can imagine going from the region surrounding Mount Hermon down is quite the decline, right? So from thousands of feet up to 685 feet below sea level. And so the Mediterranean Sea is at sea level, and this is 685 feet below that. So then the River Jordan snakes, there are so many snakes, it just goes back and forth and back and forth. Those actually add up to about 200 miles in length. But if you just draw a straight line from north to south, it's actually only 65 or 70 miles. And so it's very, very curvy river, back and forth, right? And then from the Sea of Galilee, flowing through the Rift Valley, we come to the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is actually the lowest surface of the earth. And so again, the Mediterranean is at sea level. The surface of the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea, is 1,290 feet below sea level. And so that's quite the drop again. And so the Dead Sea is actually about a quarter mile, as far as the surface of the earth is concerned, it is a quarter mile below the Mediterranean Sea. So as the River Jordan flows into the Dead Sea, there is no outlet from the Dead Sea. If there were an outlet, the sea would have to be much, much larger than it is, right? Because it would have to take up that quarter mile, roughly, of height in order to be able to have an outlet. And so basically, because this area in the south right here is wilderness, it gets very hot. It's a desert area down here. It gets very hot in the summer, and so the only outlet ultimately for the waters that flow into the Dead Sea is evaporation. Probably because of the mineral content of the soil, the Dead Sea is salty, and so it actually has about a 25% salt content. And again, because water is not flowing through the Dead Sea, it's just only flowing into it. There's no salt flow that flows out. There's only water that flows in, and then it evaporates, right? So in other words, the salt content is high and it stays high. Now let's consider a little bit of topography. And so you see in the north, where we just referenced Mount Hermon, it is higher. In general, as we move from north to south, this is the Rift Valley. As we move from north to south, the elevation tends to decrease. Of course, there's exceptions. And so, of course, Jerusalem is on Mount Moriah, and it's about 2,600 feet above sea level. And so then it decreases from 2,600 feet, about 4,000 feet, down to the area where the Jordan enters the Dead Sea. And so as we start at sea level, going from the coast inland, we start at sea level. We have the plains, we have the mountainous area, the hill country. We go down into the Rift Valley. We go back up over the Transjordan Mountains, and then we end up in the Arabian Desert. And then I found this kind of helpful cross-section. I thought it was kind of helpful. And so you can just see how it goes from sea level, it goes up into the hill country and the mountains, down into the Rift Valley, Jordan Valley, and then up into the mountains on the east of the Jordan. So in the next video, we're going to be considering the Trinitarian baptism.